After studying this module, you should be able to know about transpersonal psychology, learn about the contribution of Maslow in formation of transpersonal psychology, understand the difference amongst transpersonal, humanistic and existential psychology, learn about the origin and development of transpersonal psychology, analyze transpersonal psychology and other practices, evaluate current development of transpersonal psychology and analyze the critiques of transpersonal psychology. Maslow is by and large recognized as the forefather of equally humanistic as well as transpersonal psychology. During the period of 1960s, he alongside his colleagues Stan Grof, Anthony Soutich as well as few others suggested the terminology transpersonal psychology to differentiate as what they anticipated as the fourth force, which they felt was originating from what they referred to as the third force known as the humanistic approach. Maslow's individual concern in the transpersonal grew out of his exploration undertaking the experimental as well as motivational features of remarkable actualized individuals. Towards the end of his life, Maslow pressed the advancement of a fourth force, the other three forces being psychoanalysis, behaviorism and humanistic psychology, to compact with spiritual and religious concerns that had been until that time neglected or given inadequate weight. Such a fourth force has materialized in the viewpoint of transpersonal psychology, a field of psychology which investigates the transcendent or spiritual dimensions involving persons. Beyond the third force, transpersonal psychology is concerned to discover complete well-being or optimum welfare. This is involved in such kind of individuals who take into account frequently or perhaps permanently stretch out their standard sense of uniqueness. It comprises the supra-transpersonal, which includes the self of all selves, the solitary which reflects several. Transpersonal psychology clearly recognizes as well as attempts to utilize the reflective divine psychologies of the inordinate ethnicities Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Judaism as well as Muslim Sufism. It also comprises of original understandings as well as approaches which is present in the progress of potential in addition to consciousness enhancing actions. In 1968, Maslow felt that humanistic model had limitations. In exploring the furthest scopes of human nature, he brings into being that there were likelihoods away from self-actualization. When peak experiences are particularly dominant, the sense of self dissolves into all cognizance of a superior unity. The word self-actualization did not appear to appropriate these experiences. It has been asserted that transpersonal psychology adds towards the direction of the traditional apprehensions related to this domain and an understanding of the spiritual aspect of individual involvement. This phase of experience is mainly designated for the most part in sacred texts, in unempirical as well as frequently dogmatically subjective language. A most important undertaking of transpersonal psychology is to be responsible for a methodical, dialectical as well as a scientific outline for this measure.
Overview of transpersonal psychology. The formation of humanistic psychology was done by Abraham Maslow. Consequently, he facilitated to establish transpersonal psychology, which he deliberately included in humanistic psychology. And in the following years, the subject has been developed by other theorists such as Ken Wilber, Stan Grof, Charles Start, Michelle Murphy, Roger Walsh, and Francis Vaughan, and others. Amongst the theorists who are thought to have established the platform for transpersonal studies are William James, Carl Jung, Otto Rank, and Robert Assagioli. Investigation by which put forward that the initial usage of the term transpersonal can be found in lecture notes which William James had set for a semester at Harvard University in 1905 to 06. Though the meaning of it was different from what it is used today, at that time it was in the perspective of James' radical empiricism, in which there exists a close relation between a perceiving subject and a perceived object, identifying that all objects are dependent on being perceived by someone. Transpersonal psychology is normally closely related with or considered a branch of humanistic psychology. Its roots can be traced back to Maslow, who is also well thought out to be the originator of humanistic psychology. Nevertheless, Maslow himself saw these as different theories, referring to them as the third and the fourth forces of psychology separately. While the relations are time and again are more thoroughly drawn between transpersonal and humanistic thought, many similarities also exist with existential psychology. Difference amongst transpersonal, humanistic, and existential psychology. The essential difference between humanistic and transpersonal psychology is hard to define because several of their objectives overlap. A possible basic elucidation can be this: humanistic psychology recognizes its highest objective as understanding and developing the human potential, ever so often in existentialist and phenomenological terms, while transpersonal psychology takes an additional widespread, even religious perspective and strive for looking further than the individual to a more inclusive spiritual realm of being that comprises altered states of consciousness and considerably more. Maslow and his colleagues comprising Stweech, who had led the idea of humanistic psychology as the third force after behaviorism and psychoanalysis, saw transpersonal psychology as the fourth force that extended beyond the original three into more transcendent experiences and metaphysics. In the case of existential and transpersonal psychology, perhaps the most significant difference between existential and transpersonal theorists is the placement of the spiritual component. For the transpersonalist, the pursuit for the spiritual is understood as a higher level of consciousness. This domain is essentially beyond the personal. For existentialists, there is less of a definitive metaphysical commitment. Transpersonalists have a predisposition to stress more unidirectionally in the course of the height experiences related with being human. These are time and again stated as peak experiences, self-transcendence or self-actualization. Various existentialists would share these beliefs to an extent, but they would be a less fundamental emphasis and would be inferred in a different way. Existentialists believe it is significant to perceive greater balance in our attention to our limitations and our potentials. Humanistic psychology, positive psychology, and transpersonal psychology all lean towards to emphasize more on the potentials, often to the neglect the existential reality. The variance is not so much of content as proportion or focus. Nevertheless, existentialists will frequently interpret peak experiences or self-actualization differently. For instance, existentialists are extra inclined to interpret these experiences as bodily as an alternative of transcendence, or at the most, they interpret them as being more bodily and less transcendence. In the context of therapy, this can develop more prominent. In the movement-to-movement decision of the therapist, the height-focused therapies make a mistake to the side of aiming on possibilities and health, while existentialists also often emphasize on these potentials, they feel it is also essential to go into the limitations and painful existential realities, where a transpersonal therapist may inspire a client to let a painful experience go. An existentialist may encourage them to, for the time being, engage in the painful experience as part of the process of understanding or working through this reality. Several transpersonal psychologists are more likely to involve in techniques or processes proposed to enable spiritual growth and exploration. Many existential therapists will also function very similarly, while some avoid engaging in the more spiritually obvious procedures in therapy. Existentialists characteristically are more careful in permitting the client to lead the way into these procedures and depend on upon them less. While transpersonal psychology and existential psychology are undoubtedly diverse, nevertheless they are also closely associated. The differences are noteworthy and of importance. Nevertheless, the two fields share considerable and both gain a lot significantly from being in dialogue with each other. About transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology is considered that school of psychology which incorporates both the spiritual and transcendent facets of the human experience with the context of modern psychology. It is also conceivable to refer to it as spiritual psychology. Subject matters deliberated in transpersonal psychology consist of aspects such as spiritual self-development, self beyond the ego, peak experiences, mystical experiences, systematic trance, spiritual crunches, spiritual development, religious conversion, altered state of consciousness, spiritual practices, and additional transcendence or unusually lengthened experiences of living. This field endeavors to understand, describe, and assimilate spiritual experience within modern psychological theory and to articulate new theory to comprehend such experience. There is no single definition of transpersonal psychology. Different theorists have defined it in their own words, nevertheless, it eventually means the same. The word transpersonal originates from two Latin words, trans, meaning beyond or through, and persona, meaning mask. The term transpersonal refers to being beyond the personal. In other words, it refers to that there is an imbibed metaphysical assumption that there are realities of the human experience that go beyond the material and beyond the personal. In addition, there is an implicit valuing of these experiences. The transpersonal has been defined as experiences in which the sense of identity or self extends beyond the individual or person to incorporate extensive facets of humankind, life, psyche, or cosmos. According to Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, a short definition of transpersonal psychology is that it is concerned with the study of humanity's highest potential and with the recognition, understanding, and realization of unitive, spiritual, and transcendent states of consciousness. From the period of 1969 to 1991, LeJoy and Shapiro studied over 40 definitions of transpersonal psychology that were published in the literature, and they were able to identify five key elements which were prominent theme in particular in these definitions: states of consciousness, higher or ultimate potential, beyond the ego or personal self, transcendence, and the spiritual. The standpoints of holism and unity is dominant to the world view of transpersonal psychology. As a result, transpersonal psychology attempts to study experiences in which the individual perceives further away from the conditioned ego and recognizes a profounder and further continuing sense of self. Some of the topics which are undertaken in transpersonal psychology are sympathy, empathy, compassion, altruism, unselfishness, and unconditional love are all part of transpersonal psychology, as are experiences and beliefs that results in looking at the higher reality, whether understood of in objective terms or personalized into a dietary or dietaries. Transpersonal psychology also explores the nature, variety, causes, and consequences of transpersonal experiences and beliefs and is consequently concerned in views in such things as the soul and the survival of bodily death. Though scientists debate the validity of such beliefs, nevertheless, the great majority of human beings across cultures embrace to them frequently with philosophical significances for thought, self-concepts and behaviors. One of the prominent theorists associated with formulation of transpersonal psychology was Abraham H. Maslow. He integrated creativity, altruism, peak events and experiences and personal actions that existed outside of the ordinary personality as well as psychological trauma and personal growth. Transpersonal experiences, ideas, and visions have had a strong impact upon human history, impacting upon morality, legality, and culture, and inspiring much of the world's greatest music, literature, art, sculptures, and architecture, while their misuse has provoked international conflict, intolerance, discrimination, and violence. Even though transpersonal psychology is comparatively new as a formal discipline, beginning with the publication of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology in 1969 and the founding of the Association for Transpersonal Psychology in 1971, it draws upon ancient mystical knowledge that originate from various traditions. Transpersonal psychologists endeavor to assimilate timeless wisdom with modern Western psychology and explain spiritual principles into scientifically grounded contemporary language. Transpersonal psychology tries to take into account the complete range of human psyche, spiritual development from our deepest wounds and needs to the existential crisis of the human beings to the most transcendent capabilities of our consciousness. Abraham Maslow, Stanislav Grof, and Antony Switch were among the creators behind the publication of the first issue of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology in 1961, which was the most important academic journal in the area of transpersonal psychology. The Journal of Transpersonal Psychology caters to the publication of theoretical and applied research, original contributions, empirical papers, articles, and studies in meta needs, ultimate values, unitive consciousness, peak experiences, ecstasy, mystical experiences, B values, essence, bliss, awe, wonder, self actualization, ultimate meaning, transcendence of the self, spirit, sacralization of everyday life, oneness, cosmic awareness, cosmic play, individual and species wide synergy, maximal interpersonal encounter, transcendental phenomena, maximal sensory awareness, responsiveness and expression, and associated concepts, experiences, and activities. Transpersonal psychology is related to a psychotherapeutic practices such as psychosynthesis and transpersonal therapy, to techniques for self-exploration and personal growth such as meditation and visualization, and to an interest in Eastern psycho-spiritual traditions such as Vedanta, Zen, Tibetan and Dravidian Buddhism. Following to the objective methods of the science, it however respects self-reports of inner experience and recognizes that science progresses only if we remain aware that existing scientific laws are subject to modification in the light of new discoveries. Many transpersonal psychologists are also interested in near-death experiences and in concepts of non-locality and parapsychology. Transpersonal psychology highlights the importance of health and human potential, looking for a balance of the whole individual, which includes intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical, social, and creative. It recognizes that human beings have sexual and aggressive impulses, but put forward that they also have a drive which leads them to move towards wholeness and linking with the divine. Regarding to the saying and actions of great people, transpersonal psychology comprehends of the individual as moving forward towards the growth of full humanity. One's personal history and individual personality are purely the outward part of the transpersonal existence through which the soul and spirit can disclose itself. According to the transpersonal theorist in transpersonal psychology, the understanding of spiritual is distinct from the widely held notion of spirituality, which holds a belief or participation in a systemized religion. Maslow take account of spirituality in his drive towards self-actualization. Transpersonal psychology believes that people are innately born with needs for spiritual and transcendent experiences. Spirituality consists of a person's relationship to existential issues that go beyond everyday reality. When a desire for spirituality is not fulfilled, one might turn to deceitful spirituality such as alcohol and drugs, codependent relationship, and fanatical causes. Additional spiritual problems may comprise of loss of faith, near-death experience, and spiritual crisis due to unexpected and extreme spiritual disturbance into one's life. Several of these issues are not generally well thought out by mainstream psychology. Nevertheless, with the backing of transpersonal psychologists, a new category, religious or spiritual problem, was incorporated into the DSM-4. A lot of the phenomena that interest transpersonal psychologists have earlier been terminated by traditional psychologists as signs of various forms of mental illnesses or as regression to infantile states of psychological development. Religious and spiritual experiences have been supposed and treated as regressive or pathological, a confusion that Ken Wimbler has termed the pre or trans fallacy. Transpersonal psychologists propose that there is a difference between pre-rational psychiatry problems and authentic transpersonal problems. Ken Wilber has been one of the main contributors to transpersonal psychology, and other theorist Charles Start was the one who established empirical research into altered state of consciousness in a project that unlocked up a horizon far away from anything considered in Western scientific psychology. Wilber established a model of consciousness that assimilates the philosophies and psychologies of the ancient and modern West and East. In his theory, spirit substitutes the personal self at the center of development and develops through pre-personal, personal, and transpersonal expressions as it journeys towards self-knowledge. At the highest transpersonal level, the superior viewpoint dualities disappear and the spirit encompasses everything comprising and encompassing beyond the human self. Current developments of transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology pursues to establish itself as an academic discipline and has been incorporated into some psychology department in the United States and Europe. This intersection has facilitated to counter the portrayal of it as a type of New Age consideration or a religious or spiritual movement. Even though it has been allowed formal status by the American Psychological Association, a transpersonal psychology section has been established in the British Psychology Society. Jennings proposes that transpersonal psychology, using Jung typology, articulates the ignored interior function in American psychology needs to be assimilated into it and suggests great potential and promise for the development of psychology in the third millennium. Critique of Transpersonal Psychology. In 2005, Daniels asserted that the vulnerability of transpersonal psychology is that it every so often neglects the shadow or darker sides of being human. Identified in a different way, transpersonal psychology does not sufficiently deal with the existential realities. While Daniels' contribution to the field seeks to rectify this, it remains a significant concern. Two of the most significant existential psychologists, Rollo May and Craig Sanger, involved in critical dialogues with the transpersonal theorist. The concern most existentialists share can be expressed in the several points which are related to the differences noted above. First, there is concern about transpersonal approaches making a specific metaphysical commitment which may eliminate some religious or spiritual belief systems. Second, there is frequently apprehension with the needed inclusion of the spiritual. Existentialists have a tendency to maintain a more broad approach to spiritual issues. Third, existentialists are concerned about the neglect of the more dark or painful aspects of the human experience by transpersonalists.
A point form summary of this module is as follows. Maslow is by and large recognized as one of the forefathers of both humanistic and transpersonal psychology. In the late 1960s, along with his colleagues Stan Grof, Anthony Soutich, and others, he proposed the term transpersonal psychology to differentiate what they saw as the fourth force that was then evolving from the third force of humanistic psychology. Beyond the third force, transpersonal psychology is concerned to discover extreme wellness or optimal well-being. Amongst the theorists who are thought to have established the platform for transpersonal studies are William James, Carl Jung, Otto Rank, and Robert Ascioli. In the case of existential and transpersonal psychology, perhaps the most significant difference between existential and transpersonal theorists is the placement of the spiritual component. For the transpersonalists, the pursuit for the spiritual is understood as a higher level of consciousness. Several transpersonal psychologists are more likely to involve techniques or processes proposed to enable spiritual growth and exploration. Many existential therapists will also function very similarly, while some avoid engaging in the more spiritually obvious procedures in therapy. The differences are noteworthy and of importance. Nevertheless, the two fields share considerable and both gain a lot significantly from being in dialogue with each other. The word transpersonal originates from two Latin words, trans meaning beyond or through and persona meaning mask. According to the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, a short definition of transpersonal psychology is that it is concerned with the study of humanity's highest potential and with the recognition, understanding and realization of unitive, spiritual and transcendent states of consciousness. Transpersonal experiences, ideas and visions have had a strong impact upon human history, impacting upon morality, legality and culture and inspiring much of the world's greatest music, literature, art, sculpture and architecture, while their misuse has provoked international conflict, intolerance, discrimination and violence. The first issue of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology in 1961, which was the most important academic journal in the area of transpersonal psychology. Transpersonal psychology is related to a psychotherapeutic practice such as psychosynthesis and transpersonal therapy, to techniques for self-exploration and personal growth such as meditation and visualization, and to an interest in Eastern psycho-spiritual traditions such as Vedanta, Zen and Tibetan and Theravadan Buddhism. Transpersonal psychology highlights the importance of health and human potential, looking for a balance of the whole individual which includes intellectual, emotional, spiritual, physical, social, and creative. A lot of the phenomena that interest transpersonal psychologists have earlier been terminated by traditional psychologists as signs of various forms of mental illness or as regressions to infantile states of psychological development. Transpersonal psychology pursues to establish itself as an academic discipline and has been incorporated into some psychology department in the United States and Europe. This insertion has facilitated to counter the portrayal of it as a type of new age consideration or a religious or spiritual movement.